Okay, I'd like to call to order the City Council Ad Hoc Committee meeting being held at 6:15 on Tuesday, January 15th in the Council Room 3C. The purpose of this meeting is for DXR Holdings and Wallingford Rd petition to the Council to have the deed restrictions on the property at the airport waived. So with that being said, I'll call on our attorney or counsel to bring us up to speed as to the petition itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, in order to more detail-oriented on this to speak, if you will allow. Essentially, this is a request from the petitioner, DXR Holdings, to the City Council to act to waive a restriction on a proposed restaurant or eating establishment operation on private property adjacent to the airport off Wallingford Rd. They have requested the council act because without that action, a 1948 restriction on this business will continue. So they are asking that you folks consider taking all necessary actions, examining the basis for easing that restriction or removing it, or broadening the language in the deed restriction document to allow for this operation, which is in accordance with their request, an adjunct to airport operations that they now engage in. In essence, that's what they're asking.
Okay. Just one question. If we did decide that we did want to lift the deed restriction, what is the legal process here? Do we have, is it just a matter of us at the council meeting say, okay, it's lifted, or is there something in the courts that has to be addressed?
Well, I don't think there's anything in the courts we'd have to deal with unless there's some separate party seeking some kind of remedy. I don't expect that, but what we have to do is examine the sponsor assurance documents and the assurances that the Federal Aviation Administration has operational for airport business and operations. We have to look at the deed restriction itself, look at the background of that, check the title, everything that's happened since 1948 to be sure there isn't any other filing that would impact or impede any kind of restriction like that. We have to check with any zoning or planning implications that may exist vis-a-vis the zones that are designated for this type of use. So these are sort of, if you will, pertinent issues that would have to be examined, Jack. Technically, though, the existing deed restriction would have to be modified legally with a separate document, and it may be a new document, it may be an amended document, a corrected document, but that would be done legally. I don't see court filing at this point.
Okay. And then, as far as this deed restriction goes, I have a few reports. I've got one from the Aviation Commission. It's a positive report dated, they voted unanimously on, I think I'm looking at October 16th. So I'll give you that afterwards, but that's, and basically what their motion read was that the request to broaden the restrictions on the original deed dated December 28, 1948 be broadened to incorporate a full-use restaurant with a liquor license subject to FAA view and comment, That was seconded and passed unanimously at their meeting. So I have that report. We also have a report from the airport administrator, who I'll call on shortly, which I'll leave his comments till I call on him, and as well as from, and I can't locate it here, but I got one from the Planning Commission, which gave it a negative report based on the fact that it's going into an IL-40 zone. So with that being said, Paul, Mr. Estefan, if you could respond, and I know that the Airport Commission had asked you to give an FAA report, review and a comment as well as your own. So if you could respond to those two things, and then we can agree or disagree from there.
My report was included in the December meeting. My biggest concern, Mr. Chairman and members, as I've said before, is the city's ability to get federal monies. Pure and simple. The FAA will not comment, unfortunately, based on all of what I've gotten from them, one way or the other, as to whether they will weigh in on the issue, but have very quietly through emails that I've seen, have basically said if you do it,
There it is here.
she answered back, I guess, an email from Chris that you had sent her?
Yes.
Okay. So, secondly, this statement, and do we have a copy of that, right? I'm sorry, I think I gave it to you. Okay. Here. I'll leave myself short.
Well, I'm sorry, I was just saying, I'll think you have it.
Secondly, I believe amending this restriction to include some more up-to-date aviation-related services might in fact place the city in a better position with respect to compliance with its grant assurances to the FAA than what exists now. Although I am only seeking to add one additional use at this time. Now, this was from you, Chris.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We're not in court. Well, anyways, she responds, restaurants are not aviation-related services. Out of date or up to date, they are not in any way aviation-related. The handbook 5190.6b even says catering is not, too. I can't conceive of any scenarios where allowing non-aeronautical business, such as a restaurant, over aeronautical development and airport operations and mix plus safety will help the sponsor be in a better position with respect to compliance with its grant assurances. If the city wants to pursue this, you should have this guy put together a full business plan, including an appraisal for the property, in accordance with the FAA advisory circular on appraisals and the uniform standard appraisal procedures. By the way, that was in parentheses. And, out of parentheses, a purchase price to remove the deed restriction. Plus, he should show his financing plans and future uses before going one step further.
All right, so Paul, with that being said, let's start with your first statement with the FAA grants and the jeopardizing the FAA grants. What grants would we possibly be jeopardizing by allowing this use? I mean, I'm real confused in the fact that we used to have a Flying Squire restaurant over there.
Nor,
That was right, that was right in that zone. It was attached right to the airport for
I
years
think-
and years and years.
I think it was there in the sixties.
Right.
May I add to that?
Well, let me finish. So, I'm concerned as
They're
to,
not conforming.
it was a non-conforming use, okay, which honestly, as far as the IL 40 zone goes, which is what this falls into, having looked at the regs, we've also got special exceptions for the airport, which I would assume that would be the direction the petitioner would be going, is under a special exception for the airport attachment. It just seems to me that with this deed restriction, the way that we're getting it from 1948,
47.
okay, longer than, I wasn't around then, I'm not sure how old you are, but
No, I
I
wasn't
don't
around
think there's
either.
too many of us in this room that were around then.
Maybe, no, I don't know.
I was gonna guess you, but I,
Thanks a lot.
I'm concerned that we're restricting growth. I mean, that's, part of us, that's part of our job as the council here is to control the growth of the city. Not that this is an opportunity, this is the first opportunity we've had, if you want to call it an opportunity, or first non-opportunity, according to what you're saying from the FAA, but I don't read where the FAA is gonna pull any, or it wouldn't support our funding, because there's no, they basically gave us an answer that was no answer, is the way I read it. So how do you read that? I mean, we've got the Red Lobster, we've got the Olive Garden, all of them you could argue are attached to the airport.
They're on
So-
airport property.
They're on airport property.
So,
They were
if
done
we-
through a master plan of development, with all parties weighing in, including the FAA, the state of Connecticut, the city boards and commissions at the time, and the airport person, those for the airport, those against the airport, those that fly at the airport, those that don't fly at the airport. And when it all was said and done, it got stamped and approved by signatures. Okay? So, that's airport property, which is a good point. Waterbury Oxford is all state of Connecticut property. There's no privately owned property that I'm aware of at that location. So, the FAA is concerned about through the fence operations. They're concerned about property adjoining an airport. They're concerned about the airport mix. And they're also concerned about having a level playing field. If they take the funding from us, I have no way of getting any funding to do capital programs. Case in point, I got a $450,000 to $500,000 request coming to the council next session, next meeting, on a resolution to a master plan update, followed by a request to rehabilitate the rest of Taxiway Charlie, which is about another 3,000 feet of taxiway that has to be done. You're talking maybe between $1 million and $2 million, of which the feds give us 90%. Now, where am I going to get that?
no,
And let me finish. Your runways, the main runway was rehabbed in 1989, is now 20 years old, and I have to pull that asphalt out, and I gotta lay it back down again. Well, where am I gonna get that money? The mix that we use is not your normal highway mix. It is an FAA standard that we have to follow. Again, they pay 90%. Now, Congress can turn around and say later on, okay, we're gonna give you 95%. Thank you, it cuts our costs down. But the fact of the matter is, I have the rest of the people on the field that rely on these grants just as much as the city, because that's where they get their income from. I have to look at the whole field. I can't just look at one location. If I did that, we'd get out of business a long time ago.
so, I hear you. There's nobody that praises you more than me. You know that, for the amount of grant monies that you get for the city and for the airport. I've said it on public record several times. My concern is, they're not stating to us here, there is no documentation, there is no, well, if you do that, we're not gonna give it to you.
They're not going to either.
So how could they justify not giving it to us if we were to move out on this?
Well, remove it and we'll all find out.
Well, that's not a fair statement.
Well, that's the sad part,
That's-
because what they're telling us is, you run your airport, you're the sponsor. We will decide after you make this decision, whether you're in compliance or not in compliance. However, we will answer certain questions. It's your airport. They do not get involved in local issues. Through the fence operations have been a red herring with them. If we didn't have Reliant and Sadler and Exit LLC, which used to be Bluebird, if we didn't have them when we had them, we wouldn't have them today. They would not allow us to open up the fence line to bring them on board. Pure and simple.
So, just for the record, and don't get into a 20-minute Paul sermon, clarify the through the fence concerns that you have. Clarify what through the fence is.
We'll use Chris, because that's the subject matter. He's on private property. There's a sliver of property in front of his property that he parks airplanes on. That came before the city council a couple years ago. The FAA weighed in on it. And basically, what we had to do internally was create a through the fence fee. We kind of like took $10,000 for sake of argument for an acre, and we carved out $2,000 for the through the fence side of the lease agreement. That's basically what we did. So that meant we were now in compliance with the grant agreements. The other thing is that I had to justify to the FAA the building, the residence that he inherited from the Sadler family. The kitchen, the bedrooms, the living room, the dining room, because it was done in 1947, 10 years before the FAA was created, and 13 or 14 years approximately when the FAA's policy came into effect regarding residences on an airport. Okay? So, I said to Chris one day, don't ever let that residence go, because if you let it go, your exemption is gone, basically. And that is the latest change the FAA has made on through the fence. They don't want them. They are trying to get us to get rid of them. And I'm saying, hey, look, I've got them here and I'm not changing. Don't change it. Keep it as a residence, because the minute you change it, I can't do anything for you. And I'm saying that publicly too. I can't help you in any way. I've done my work, whether you realize it or not. I had to answer a whole series of questions to the FAA regarding through the fence operations on the airport and what we currently have there. And I think I did this about a year ago.
And that's still, the residence is still there and in operation.
That's fine.
for your
God bless you.
information.
But the fact of the matter is, they don't want through the fence operations. They don't want them.
Okay. Les, if we were to lift this deed restriction,
Oh, okay.
what would the next step be for the applicant?
Well, they probably have to go back to the zoning commission and deal with the zoning issue. One of the reasons that the planning commission denied this proposal is they were concerned about a commercial use in a zone in which they don't want it, and it's not recommended. And that's one of the things that Paul kind of touched on. The FAA spoke to that in the reference they made to the federal sponsor assurances, implying pretty strongly, I guess, although not saying it directly, that if there is a land use issue, that could have an impact on the application of the sponsor assurances. If, for example, you have a situation where an operation that is a commercial operation is allowed to operate in an airport zone, which is a different zone, that could be a problem for them. Now, it's difficult to say how the inaction by the zoning commission changing that would operate with respect to the sponsor assurances, given that language that the FAA has put forward. So to answer your question, that's the first step. They would have to go back and take care of the planning issues. As far as the Aviation Commission is concerned, they've provided a recommendation making it subject to the FAA also essentially blessing it, if you will, or at least saying that there are no sponsor assurance violations that would exist. So I think you'd have to go and get the Aviation Commission to confirm their earlier recommendation. So once the council acts, those are the two initial steps I can think of. Now, the third important step would be that the FAA would probably want to see the amended deed language, just to assure itself, given the concerns that they expressed in their information, their correspondence with Paul and others, that they would want to see that to make sure that, number one, it doesn't conflict with the sponsor assurance clauses regarding the zoning questions, nor would it create a problem with regard to aeronautical implications. In other words, they may want to see how the restaurant is going to be operated. That's one of the reasons they asked for the business plan. They want to see, as a result of that, they want to see the implications on aeronautical business at the airport. So they highlighted that. It's not to say, I don't think there's language anywhere that says that the FAA has said that as a result of the sponsor assurances directly, that they disapprove of the project, but they should at least, as a third component, would want to review the documents that are produced after the council approves. So hopefully that, so zoning, Aviation Commission, FAA.
Paul?
Yeah, through the chair to council. I'm missing something. We seem to have gotten a little distance between the original petition, which is to modify or get rid of the deed restriction, and how we actually go about doing that. Where is the authority that we have that allows us to do this? If I sell you a piece of property with a deed restriction on it, and 100 years later it goes through 2 or 3 hands, can my descendants just magically remove the deed restriction? This is not our property, it's the Sadler's property. It was our property, we sold it to the Sadlers, they sold it to the petitioner. What gives us the statutory authority to get rid of this restriction in the first place? That's what I'm confused.
We exercised our rights in 1948 to deed this property, inserting in there a deed restriction. Only we as the grantor can adjust that through the proper authorization of the legislature.
We have the authority under Connecticut state statute to do that?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's the first issue, so that's not a problem.
Yes.
Okay. The issues I have are pretty straightforward, and I think the same issues that just about everybody here has in the city. Precedent for deed restriction, whether we have the legal authority to do that, it looks like that we do.
Yes.
IL-40 zone dilution, I have a big problem with that. We're not making any more industrial property, and the few people that still have it, if they find out they have a commercial or a use for it that may be more lucrative than putting up a factory or warehouse, they may start doing that, and I would be very nervous about doing that, allowing, even once it leaves this committee, having the zoning commission allow the dilution of an IL-40 zone. I would not be in favor of that. I think there's a couple of ways we could get around that, and I think that we could create an airport enterprise zone or something like that, but strictly diluting an IL-40 zone would not be a list of one of my priorities. I think a restaurant's needed. I can't remember ever being to an airport in my life that didn't have a restaurant. I mean, I was very much in favor of rebuilding in Danbury. I was sorry to see that they didn't include a food facility, because it still would have been grandfathered, and that would have been a really wonderful thing. I think it's good for a couple of reasons. Airport customers. I think it also integrates the airport with the people who own it, the taxpayers in Danbury, who never really have a reason to go there and don't really have a reason to support it. Having a restaurant at the airport that is, open to people flying in, but also open to local people who would perhaps get a chance to actually see how the airport operates, go there at night, see the lights, the planes could be, wow, it's great that we have an airport down there. That would be a good thing to have. It would be
It
right.
also attracts the people flying in to do business with the
Right.
operators at the airport.
Right. We understand how important it could be for people who use the airport, but it also has, I think, some importance to people who don't use the airport. So I just happen to be in favor of place to go to the bathroom, place to eat, do things like that, a little recreation, in addition to the actual business of the airport. So I think it's needed. I just am very uncomfortable using this process to create a restaurant there. I have a problem with lifting the deed restriction, even if we have the authority to do that. I don't know how many other deed restrictions Danbury has, but we're creating value here. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but the FAA does have a point. I mean, if we were to retroactively restrict the use of somebody's property, which the state has some authority to do, there is a taking there. But doing the opposite, removing a restriction, is in a sense a giving. We have a petitioner who purchased the property with the understanding that these restrictions were in place, and if we do nothing, no harm has been done. I mean, there has been no change, because he purchased it with the idea that this is all I can do with it. But if we go ahead and we remove the restriction, we would be adding value to the property, and not, again, necessarily that's a bad thing. But I think it might open us up to requests down the road, and it would be hard to deny those requests if we granted this one. Personally, what I would like to see is the petitioner working with zoning. And it may be time, we've got the 10-year plan of development coming up. I don't think we've done it since 2001 or 2. I would support and vocally support an airport enterprise zone that would include uses like this. Whether the petitioner would then be the one to get that restaurant, or it would be open to some sort of an auction process, would remain to be seen. I don't know how Dennis Elpern would put that together. But this process, the FAA, the issues that they have, the issues with lifting a deed restriction, and the complete unknown about what's going to happen to the I-40 zone makes me nervous about this particular thing. I have no nerves at all about having a restaurant. It would be great. If I could snap my fingers and make one, then that would be a wonderful thing. But it's dragging along with it some problems that I see right now down the road.
Jackson, since Paul addressed the original question to me, his comments are pretty much on target, because the FAA's correspondence to Paul of October 20th sets out pretty much in more sponsor assurance related language all of the issues of concern if the council did lift or amend the deed restriction. And you could obviously amend, you don't have to take the whole thing and destroy it. But what the FAA has said is that should the city council, should the city authorize this use, here are the following issues of concern. The same ones you mentioned: the zoning issue, the fair fee, fair rent structure, fair use structure, zoning implications we mentioned. All of those issues were laid out. Now, what the FAA did not say was that you're going to lose your sponsor assurances. They simply said that as a result of these concerns that we've outlined for you, if you legally do that, you may, unless you do it right, and even if you do it right, because of future implications that are yet unknown, you could be at risk. That's kind of what they said. All right.
So there were attorneys saying shoulds and shalls and woulds and mays, and they leave us,
Yeah,
leave us in la la land.
in fact, at the very end of the letter, they said, quote, "The FAA does not impose itself in the business decision-making process of airport sponsors. The sponsor may exercise its property rights, save for instances where there exist federal preemptions." It's not so strong, which they totally prohibited. If later on, upon submission of what happened to them, it's possible they could come back with some additional comment. I'm only stating that just so you're aware of it, that because of the number of things that they outline, it's difficult to tell.
So let me ask you this: if we were to amend the deed restriction pending a FAA, much like what the Airport Commission did, pending an FAA approval, I mean, if we don't get a direct yes from the FAA, then obviously we can't move forward with this. How do we force their hand to give us the yes, is the bottom line. And I know Paul's gonna say we can't force their hand. Go ahead, Paul.
No, I'm not gonna say that. The last administration in 1991, Attorney Pinter and I sat in this room with an ad hoc committee regarding the trees at Worcester School. And we lost. The FAA wrote to then Mayor Iroquois requesting that he take care of the tree issue. It dragged on for 2.5 years. The end result was the FAA, the city sent the money back for the tree trimming on Worcester's property, refused to go forward, and said, we're not doing anything with it, and they stripped us of our monies. We were stripped until the present administration came in and laid out almost $2 million right up front to get the deed restriction lifted and to get us going, once again, getting federal monies. I hate to tell you what that cost us in that block of time. A lot of money. We are still playing catch-up ball with the grant agreements. The hazard beacons were delayed, the rotating beacon was delayed, taxiway reconstructions were delayed. I mean, it went on and on and on.
There's an inherent difference, Paul, didn't that
So
issue
let me,
deal with safety?
you need to have the floor. Let Paul finish, Chris.
So, that resolution was easy to resolve once we got a new administration in and sold the idea on the package. We lift this, the resolution is gonna be what? Condemn the property and take it? Because we didn't get our federal monies? I don't know. How do I resolve it? That one, the point is that the previous one, I knew what we had to do to resolve it. On this one, not Paul Estefan's gonna roll the dice on this deal. I am not gonna be the goat on a loss of millions of dollars. They've got over $25 million in this airport and continue to give us substantial money. Not me. I refuse to roll that dice. You guys wanna do it? God bless you. But I don't want my name on that document because I don't want the lawsuits from the rest of the operators. When I tell them, I have no money to rebuild the runway, I have no money to replace the runway lights, I got no money to do anything on this airport because the FAA will not allow me to do it because I made one fatal error, I didn't speak up.
I think the point to respond to what you said there, Paul, back in the 90s you had a directive and you didn't follow a directive. The problem that I have is we don't have a directive. We've got a well, if, then, and it stinks. So what I'm trying to do is create a way where, I hope what we can do is create a way where we could amend the deed restriction pending the FAA's approval, and if we don't get it, if DXR can't get it, then DXR can't get it. But we need them to point blank come out to us and say, okay, you're not gonna impair yourself. If this is the best we got, then we can't move forward. I mean, it would just, none of us wanna gamble with that much money. So, Joe, did you have anything before I push it out to?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Councilmember Otello said. I don't wanna seem archaic, and I don't wanna seem like I'm inflexible, but I have a huge issue with lifting the deed restriction based on reading actually a clearer copy of it. I struggled through my copies, and I just have an issue with something that the body of this city that I currently sit on put in place with the intentions of keeping it related to airport and airport-related businesses. There are times that we sit actively now, Jack and Paul, where we do things and we approve items with restrictions on them because at the time, we feel it's in the best decision of the city, and we place those restrictions on it. And I'm not comfortable with the thought of people coming back and lifting those restrictions. And, I understand things change, and I understand some of the airport has changed, and But I think, you know, some of the coverages that we've put on things through the years with Mr. Pinter and stuff, and for somebody to come back by without a real valid reason to lift them, you know, like Mr. Orsini bought this property, how long ago?
2 years ago.
Okay, with the deed restriction in place, knowing that's what it was. And is now here before us asking us to lift the deed restriction. You know, I'm a little bit uneasy about that. The FAA issues, I think, carry as much equal weight to my concerns with the deed restriction lifting. I'm not entirely sure that I've had some dealings with the FAA over the years, government issues through my job, and, you know, I understand how they get. And I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but I understand how they get about things. And, you know, if all things equal, the FAA came in and said, we have no problem with this, I don't know that I have as much problem with the deed restriction as I do right now, but I would say I probably have an equal concern with both the deed restriction and the FAA's concerns. I have a small concern with safety for access to the taxiway where the building is currently ground level. You know, the other restaurant, I believe, was second floor. This proposed use is ground floor and has access out onto the taxiway, I guess it is, or
Apron.
the apron.
No access, there'd be no access to the.
Yeah, we could restrict that.
That's all in the plan, and even the prior restaurant, when you came down the stairs, you walked out on the ramp, so. In order to leave, you had to get to the same point. This would actually be more restricted than that was, in fact, the way we had.
Because I went over and looked at the building, and I see where the door is out on the inside of the fence.
Well, it'd be a fence put inside, and there, you know, you would have no, it'd be restricted access. It'd
So like
be
I
more
said,
restrictive than.
the safety is a smaller part of it for me, and I'd have to be really assured of that. But really, the FAA has to rule in on this and say, you know, and I think Mr. Orsini and Mr. Estefan and the FAA should meet and try to work some of this out and come back to us with a consensus. I'd like to see, I'd feel more comfortable with that than anything right now.
Before I open it up to you, Mr. Epstein, I failed at the beginning of the meeting to introduce everybody that was here. I think I jumped right into things. Did I not introduce?
You did not, that's okay.
Okay, well, I just wanted, because of the fact that petitioners are here. So basically who we have here today is myself, Jack Knapp is the chair, Councilman Joe Cavo, and Councilman Paul Rottello as the committee. We have Paul Estefan, the airport administrator, Les Pinter, Corporation Counsel, and Bruce Tomala, the economic director. And then from the petitioner side, we have Robin Kahn, we have the attorney for the petitioner, and then we have the petitioners themselves, which is, what did I figure, Chris Orfacini, and I wrote your name down here, Tom Tork. Sorry, Tom.
That's
with that being said, yeah, I mean, Joe, in response to what you said, I'm with you pretty much 100% on that. My concern was I didn't really want to slam the door on the opportunity for a deed restriction, but I also don't think it's fair that the FAA is putting us in a position to, you know, roll the dice. I mean, that's not what good government's about. So, with that being said, before we entertain any motions, I'll open it up to the petitioner if they wish to comment on a lot of the banter you've heard going around here.
Well, okay, we'll start here. I'm a little dizzy after all that, but and also at the point, you know, there is a, I mean, I don't know where to start, at the end or the beginning, you know, some of my notes, you know, how, you know, the council member,
Rotello.
no,
Capital.
raised, you know, how we purchased the property 2 years ago, we knew about the restriction, and you know, as we started developing the property, invested quite a bit of money into the property, which ultimately has been a big improvement to the airport and has actually brought a lot of business from Bridgeport and Oxford, and you know, people have now repositioned their airplanes with us. we realized, and, part of what's in my letter to the FAA, which unfortunately, if you've read through, I don't know if anybody's read through the correspondences between the airport administrator and the FAA, we were requesting a meeting to actually be able to have communication with them, but it was not promoted by the airport administrator for what reasons we don't know. But the fact is that a lot of so we purchased this property with the deed restriction. We're at a point now where we have, and if you read through my letter, we have 2 maintenance facilities. We have a charter operator, a flight school, and to have another one of those very restrictive uses come in, is only going to be more competition not only for our site, but also that's just on our site. On the airport, there's several. So my idea was, why not bring something in that actually, well, for the city in general, a value to lift the read restrictions, 50 jobs in a restaurant that we're proposing. So that's a value to the city. Aside from that, now we have something that people are going to come in and become familiar with, not only Danbury, but the other businesses on the airport, not compete with them. We're not going to put another maintenance shop in or another charter operator that's going to compete with Reliant or BAC or one of the other guys. There's going to actually be a place where somebody may come in and realize there's a charter operator at BAC or somewhere else and utilize the area. So when I wrote the FAA here, if you read through some of the correspondences, she took that as me saying that the city should shut the door to all other aviation. I'm not aviation use. That was not my intent at all. And unfortunately, I then had an opportunity to talk to Paul why we would never afford an opportunity to have a meeting with them to solidify this thing. So I think, we did know there was a restriction. We didn't at the time realize, we weren't 100%. We did our plan and we have the space and it's the ideal use for it. And quite frankly, I haven't really met anybody yet that, in all our conversations and Danbury stuff, that understands why this can't happen here, the location, So for that reason, the deed restriction goes back to 1940. And that's another thing I highlighted in my correspondence today, which again, we didn't have an opportunity to sit down and meet with them to really make her understand, like you were permitting me to allow you to understand where my thoughts were, was this restriction was done in 1941. I mean, technically, we can't sell jet fuel. Jet fuel, because it was done before jets were built. So it's a little antiquated. 2010, there's 31 restaurants within the vicinity of Danbury Airport, on airports. There's 2 on city property at Danbury. I mean, there's definitely a precedent set, with this. So, as far as the zoning and the IL-40 zoning, I think, we're not looking for the city to take the IL-40 zoning. It's a good thing for the airport, permitted in the IL-40 zoning in the airport. I'm not certain about this, but my hunch tells me that the Olive Garden and the Rock Lobster are probably partially on commercial and partially IL-40, depending on how deep that road frontage is from Bikers Avenue. So it may already exist, but I'm not certain about that. I haven't done the research. With respect to Administrator Estefan's stating that those 2 restaurants were in the master plan, I've read the master plan. I don't know where it is, so I don't know if it's appropriate to request a copy of where that is in the master plan here at this meeting, but I do not see anything that permits that. I mean, I could read to the council what's in here about restaurants and catering facilities. So,
The two properties out there were labeled as commercial property.
Right,
It's on the airport master plan, the airport layout plan, and it's not in the book. And
Okay, well,
if you want to see the drawing, I'd be more than happy to.
well, no, I understand commercial, but I thought it was presented in the context that if the restaurants were in the master plan, those 2 restaurants were in the master plan, and ours isn't,
I had sent those items up to the FAA back in the 80s to make sure that the city would not have a problem.
for
The
commercial.
zone was changed because it's city property
So,
to CG whatever.
So in any event, I mean, there is some commercial uses permitted in IL-40 zoning, I believe. Is that, Paul, is that
That's not-
correct?
That's not me.
The closest,
No, I think
the closest thing would
within
be a bakery, wholesale bakery in IL-40.
the hotels.
Special exceptions, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's 6A. I looked at them closely today, and there's a section for, you got the IL-40, then you got the airport use, and you got a special exceptions for the airport, and then it would have to be within 500 feet of the airport property. So there is an area, if that was being pursued by the petitioner, that's where it would go.
I mean, I don't
It would
think, I
just-
think,
If
you
you
know,
think we've added, in a couple of years ago, added to those was, might even be more than that. What's his name, Reefberg's offices are out there. They added that to it to include offices into that zone because they're attached. So that was, that was a special exception that was added.
honestly, that was the first area I looked at.
Yeah.
And I went to
Well,
Ben
I mean-
Dodo and he said, where's our problem gonna be? And I said, is it gonna be in the zoning? He goes, no, I think it could happen under special.
Well, it would be easy enough to write an airport exception in IL-40.
They're already there.
Right, and it would have no effect on the rest of the IL-40. I mean, that's easy enough to do. I don't want to speak for Director Alpern, and I'm not
Yeah,
sure
no,
that
I'm
he would
just,
favor that.
well, I'm just
But
letting.
one of the ways, it's not there now. Instead of asking for a special exception to put restaurants in all the IL-40s, you would ask for a special
Right.
exception within an airport cut out in an IL-40, which would just affect your own property.
That's really
Or-
where we
or-
started with this process.
Or allow other operators on the airport to have
Whatever,
something
yeah,
too.
no,
I mean,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, no,
it's
no.
important to
We're
an
not- I mean-
airport, it really is, whether whether the FAA officially considers restaurants an aviation use, let's face it,
Right.
pilots fly and go for breakfast, that's a big part of general aviation, so why it's not classified, I never was.
Yeah, I think what you're gonna find is, and I got an idea too about this, too. I think what you're gonna find is the next time that we look at that, both Paul and I are gonna be there pushing for them to put restaurants in, because I think that it's just a natural evolution for the airport. I think that when this deed restriction was created in 1948, there was nothing out there. There was Marcus Dairy, a bunch of cows, in a place where they held the Danbury Fair once a year. So, I mean, it was really, I think those restrictions were probably trying to keep it into the theme of airport, and I think that we might have outdated it. Again, that's me trying to think for the original deed restriction, so I don't know. But what I'd like to do is, unless it meets with any objection, is extend the meeting, unless you're in a position to make a motion. But I would like to see more of a firm position from the FAA on this.
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Can I continue though, or am I done?
Yeah, I mean, I think you might want to let us continue with the FAA, but yeah, if you don't think that's going to happen, then,
No, I just want to finish.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Because if we're going to the, and I was getting to that in my notes, because I gathered that, and I also was going to say, if the city council, if everything was contingent, the FAA, that's great, we go back, we ultimately got to get an answer from the FAA, but, unfortunately, how the FAA is approached and how it's presented to them by the airport administrator has a lot to do with where things go. And if, when my kids were young, we had a place on the ocean, we always told about the sharks in the ocean. And, if the way the
So
presentation.
Paul's a shark?
No.
Shark, I guess I'm a shark.
No, no,
On
no, no.
everything else, what the heck?
You have a wonder of taking the FAA and presenting to the city that there's a bunch of sharks out there, and and be afraid because, like using the tree example, which I tried to talk about earlier, that was a safety issue. It's completely different than what we're talking here.
It was a safety issue, there was no argument, but they stripped us of our money and they put us behind the 8 ball.
Because we didn't cut the trees.
This is
They
not a
only cut the
safety
trees.
issue. So,
I
mean,
had an out though, Chris, that's the point. I had an out. Where's my out here if we make a mistake?
Paul, can I ask you this? There was a tentative request there was a request by the petitioner to meet with the FAA and yourself. Can we make something like that happen? Do you feel that's a waste of time? I mean, why do we not want to pursue that, I guess is my question.
Because quite honestly, I don't know where the petitioner's coming from, other than he's been to Dennis, he's been here, he's been there, and then he knocks on my door when everything else is falling around it, and I'm going, why am I in the middle of something that I knew nothing about from the very beginning?
Well, we're kind of past that. I think this.
I understand that, but the point is, What do I say to the FAA?
I think what we have been hoping
I'm not-
for
I'm
was
not-
a meeting where we could participate. It appears from what Ms. Latrella said is that she will not set up a meeting unless you are involved and essentially request it, so.
And I think that it can't be done over the phone.
No, we're prepared to go.
I'm
with
prepared
you.
to travel as well.
Well, we were clear about that. I'm not certain about,
I think if anything's gonna happen, it's gotta be done in person. Because I've been in that shark's tank more than once, and it's not pleasant.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before we make a motion, I would like to request, if we happen to get the FAA's here, for them to satisfy my curiosity about any additional security issues they may have with the restaurant vis-a-vis through the fence. Would they have more of a security issue with the restaurant serving alcohol as opposed to any other business that's already allowed, like a repair shop or anything else? It seems to me, if you're going to allow the general public into the structure for getting the tires changed and replenishing and fueling up, it doesn't really make any more of a difference to them that you let them in there for a restaurant. But they may have a big problem with that. I'd like to know. So if you.
I will ask them.
we currently pay a through the fence fee. And
But I understand that after 9/11, there's a security issue that they have with our airport. We've had some issues with the airport. I think I'm talking about a school here, and through the fence seems to be singled out on a pretty regular basis. So would they have more of an issue with a restaurant at a through the fence operation than any other thing allowed within this restriction? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you do proceed with that motion, if I can interject quickly, that keep in mind that if one of the prominent issues in the FAA correspondence and one of the two negative reports, and this is from the Planning Commission, the Planning Department has specifically expressed its concern about the adjustment to the use in the zone. You may want to have the
I already have it down here to invite him.
to go through it.
Dennis or
I already have it on there.
Dennis or Arnie.
Yeah, the reason for that is not just for the planning and zoning folks to be here, but because the FAA has specifically interjected a tie-in to the sponsor assurances based on that issue. So it's an issue that has implications both from the planning and zoning departments as well as the FAA, because it's very prominent in the correspondence that the FAA was concerned about the impact on the zone and on the aeronautical area and on non-aeronautical area. So that's why somebody from there should definitely be able to speak.
I have Mr. Alperton right here to include that in my motion. Thank you, Mr.
Would you like to make your motion to continue,
I
sir?
will make a motion, and it's gonna be complicated, so hang on to that. I'll make a motion to continue this committee for the purposes of retrieving a clearer answer. I want the petitioner and the airport administrator to try to retrieve a clearer answer from the FAA about the do's and the don'ts of lifting this deed restriction. I'd like to invite Dennis Alpern to our next meeting as a part of the committee, and I'd also like to ask in that same motion if the Corporation Counsel's office would also research whether or not there would be a fee for lifting the deed restriction or not, whether or not there would be anything that would involve a cost to that item for lifting the restriction. And then we could convene at the chairman's call based on that information.
Do you want to second that, or do you want to have him repeat it?
Yeah, no, we can spare the repeating. I think we're good on that. We have a pretty good idea of what we're doing. Yeah, I second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Any discussion?
Yes, I do. I actually, I'm also concerned about a giving here. You know, we sit in, with the assets of the city in trust that are sort of overseen by us, and we would essentially be giving away some value. I would like to explore a potential a dollar figure to that value. Above and beyond the actual administrative costs of doing this. It may be worth $1, it may be worth $100,000. I have no idea. It may not be worth anything, but I mean, it might not be the worth. The FAA clearly, from what I understand, has expressed some interest in that. Yeah, not in terms of the cost of lifting the restriction, but the value of that restriction, so.
We'll charge the city the same we charge them for the sewer easement. Zero.
We paid,
Okay, well, let me finish it. Okay, so the motion's been made, seconded, discussion, any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned by
Second.
Mr. Costello. All those in favor, aye.
That's it.
7:11.
I'd love to talk to Jessica about a meeting next week.
Good morning. Chief Harold, Danbury Fire Department here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about disposal of ashes, either from your fireplace, your fire pit, or your charcoal grill. Unfortunately, many times during the year, improper disposal of these ashes has resulted in fires, both in Danbury and other areas. So we would like to remind you of a few key points. Never ever put ashes in any kind of a combustible, or in the case of plastic, a meltable container. Although the ashes may feel cool, ashes often harbor a few hot spots, and these can indeed burst into flame when unwatched or put away in a place unsafe. For example, on several occasions in the city of Danbury, we've had ashes put into cardboard boxes, paper containers, or plastic barrels. These have been placed outside, seemingly safe. However, the heat builds up, fire reignites, and often on a wooden deck or against the siding of a home can result in a fire. So please, use a proper disposal container. This means metal implements to move the ashes, a metal implement to carry them, such as a bucket or a covered container, and remove them entirely from the home or the garage. Put them outside, not against the building, far away from anything else that's combustible. By doing this, you will ensure yourself, your family's safety, and the safety of the neighborhood. Thank you very much for listening.